Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Oh,
Hello. Welcome to our next episode of Mothers Against Racism, a conversation about race from a mother's perspective. I am Daniela Forst and my co-host,
Donna Marshall.
Donna Marshall. We have a very special guest with us tonight, a very near and dear friend of mine, Sharrona Reaves. Sharrona is a former women's basketball coach, 18 years, I believe, coaching women's basketball at several very successful Division I women's basketball program, Tennessee in particular, West Virginia, and has been a head coach as well. And she has recently transitioned out of coaching into developing, directing, and creating her own podcast called These Three Things, which is, and I'll let her explain a lot more about her podcast because I'm sure she can do it way better than I can. But, we've had the pleasure of having several different mothers on our show. We've had Judge Christina Perez. We had the mayor of Gloucester, Safatia Taken. We've had an educator last week where we had Deborah Johnson, who's a professor as well as a sports mom. We've had obviously Wanda Durant on, but we've had several women who are in very successful roles in their lives. And I think no role more important than being a mother in today's society, raising children with, everything that's going on in America right now. So we are very excited to have a former coach and a very successful communicator, marketer, stepping out of coaching and having her own podcast. I mean, just people from just tremendous backgrounds that have really successful careers and have really made an impact in the lives of other people, other children. And we're very excited to have her on our show tonight. Thank you for being here, Sharrona.
it's an honor.
Welcome.
It's an honor. Thank you. All those people, all those women that you just named. I don't know if I'm happy to come behind all of those dynamic women, but I'm honored to be here.
Oh, you're definitely with that group. Like I
Sure.
said, we're very successful to have your perspective on being a mother and in today's turmoil society with the social injustice and racial injustice that's happening in America and how we raise our children. And you are a mother of a boy and a girl, Kendon and Kimora,
Yes.
right?
Kendon
How
and
old are
Cora.
they?
Yeah.
Right, Kim. And obviously you have juggled being a career woman as well as a mom, and not only that, but navigating all of that while being conscious of what's happening in society.
Mhm.
You really have done an excellent job raising your children. So tell us a little bit more about Sharrona Reaves.
Well, I mean, you pretty much covered it. I came from women's basketball. Was there 18 years. And after my last job, really just felt like I had done everything in the world of basketball that I could do short of being a Division I head coach. And the opportunity to do that wasn't presented to me. And so I didn't, at that point, want to move on any further as an assistant. I felt like I should pivot. And in the process of the pivot, my podcast came to me, which, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I am a creative by nature. I am a communications major. I majored in media marketing, advertising. I actually won an internship to New York my senior year in college for work that I had submitted to an ad agency. So I have always been a creative, but I've always loved basketball. So basketball was the pull in my life for many years, but when I decided to pivot and go in a different direction, I think my more creative side was able to come forth. And I created a company that I call Sharrona Brand Communications. And the first venture out of that communications company is my podcast, These Three Things, which is a podcast for women of color. I feel that over the 18 years that I was coaching and recruiting and traveling the country and building relationships with families and women, I just noticed like the distance between women of color with other women of color and the lack of support that we show at times. And it wasn't just from my work experience or personal experience. I also just in my friends who were not in the coaching world expressed those same sentiments as well. And that's something throughout my career that's always really been near and dear to me. It's always frustrated me that you'd be in a work environment with other women of color and we may not even speak, we may not even like each other. And I do feel like those issues between us are very systemic. And I think that there was a need to create a space for me to be able to address those issues and talk about them. And on the show, I leave 3 things to take away from each episode. I also have a resident therapist on the show, because when we talk about the deeper things that, above my pay grade and knowledge of how to help us to come to a more common place and a more grace-filled space with each other, the therapist is there to talk us through those things. And so I didn't want to create a space where we just talked about the problem and then, okay, we'll see you next week for another episode. I wanted to talk about our problems and our issues, and also the things that we do well, and affirm us in the things that we do well. But I wanted to leave takeaways so that moving forward, as women, we can agree that this is how we're going to treat each other in this situation. This is how we're going to handle this in a better way moving forward, because now we have tools to, see each other in a different light, or give each other more grace, or understand each other, or extend the communication piece just to talk about whatever it is that we may not agree about. And so I've been excited about it. It's been, we wrapped up season 1 about a month ago, and the reception has been amazing. I've currently been listened to in 8 countries. Australia, I just got listeners from Australia like yesterday. So I woke up this morning and I was like, okay, Australia, welcome to these 3 things, So
Boy, right?
it's a new country that's coming in, that's listening to the show. I usually don't post if they only listen like 1 episode, because I always think, 1 episode, anybody could listen to a show. But if they're consistently coming back, then I'll acknowledge that, hey, they're listening to the show. It's done well in the U.S. I think my 4 biggest listening states are Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, and California.
Wow.
So, and I'm listening to it in a lot of other states, but I get big numbers in those states, which is, pretty crazy, but it's spread out, but I love that. So I'm excited, I'm excited about my company, my communications company. I'm excited about These 3 Things podcast. And I'm excited to be on Mothers Against Racism, because as Dania knows, I love to talk about, what's happening in our country. So it's an honor to be here.
I just wanted to circle back, and you were saying about women of color and the relationships you have beyond work. And I think that's a women's issue, not necessarily just with women of color, because I think I've observed women in general, call it cannibalism. Like, we kind of eat each other up. And we have. And so I don't know if that's an exclusive. I think that can be, and I don't know what causes this, but I've seen the same behavior in the workplace with all women.
I agree. And I actually addressed that. My very first episode launch that I released was Black women in our relationships with white women. I am very well aware that just women in general, we tend to not always be the most supportive of each other.
Yeah. What is that about? What's that about?
Well, I have really been intentional about trying to get to the bottom of it. For me, I absolutely realize it is a across the board issue, but just for women of color, I felt that we can't be in better relationships with anybody until we can learn how to be that to each other first. So that is where I started. I honestly do believe that the vision for These 3 Things will eventually venture out and be not just the podcast for women of color, because a lot of white women listen to the show. A lot of men listen to the show. Like on Spotify, my biggest listening audience are males 35 to 60. So they want to know what the women have to say. But I do agree, Donna. I think that it's a women's issue just in general. My focus right now is on us, because I feel like a lot of things systemically and historically have been placed up on women of color that have caused the divide in our relationship, that I feel that as far as our ancestors, our female ancestors are concerned, their relationships with each other is how they survived the horror that they experienced through slavery. And so I think that somewhere along the way, we as African American, Black women, women of color, however you want to say it, I think that we lost that connection that once kept us. And so that is really my focus right now, is to help us as women of color find that, but also understanding that we've got to reach across the aisle to our sisters that are not women of color, and build those bridges as well. Because ultimately, you know, I say this all the time, like, we're going to outlive our men most of the time. Women usually outlive their men, and we're all going to have to eventually take care of each other. And so those relationships are just really important.
Yeah, totally agree. That was well said. Well said.
You brought up some interesting points, and one is, you know, when we spoke to Mayor Thakin, she said that there's racism within the races. Like, she talked about the Brazilians that are in her community fighting among each other.
Yes.
And there's inner kind of racism that's going on. And I think you're kind of alluding to that sometimes with what you're saying, that within our own culture, there is, you know, racism and hatred because of whether it's light skin, dark skin, whether it's skinny, fat, we always try to find something to pull each other down or to criticize one another. In your work with these three things and speaking with people, what do you think the underlying, and you kind of mentioned it, what do you think the underlying reasons are for us to have this hatred within our own communities, within our own race? That's something we need to talk about too, because we're constantly, you know, critiquing and blaming other races for being unjust towards us.
Yeah.
But we do a lot of things that are unjust towards each other. So what kind of things have you found out that we do? Give us some examples of things that we do as a race to kind of tear each other down, whether it's women against women or blacks against blacks.
Well, in particular to your first point of within our own race, what I have learned in season 1 is that every Black woman that I spoke to all agree that there's an issue within us culturally and how we treat each other and how we don't always support each other. We sabotage each other. We flat out lie on each other at times, you know, depending on the situation. And I think a lot of it, from what I'm learning as I'm going through the process, are systemic things that we don't even realize that we're functioning in. For example, to give an example to your point, the whole colorism issue. You know, in slavery times, as Black women begin to have babies by their masters or whoever, you know, the perpetrator was that impregnated them at that time during those years, and our culture began to lighten as a result of that, the lighter skinned people were moved into the house and were able to work within the home. So that was kind of more of a coveted role than the darker skinned complected brothers and sisters who had to work in the field, who had to toil the land, who had to do more harder things, harder work. And as a result of that, it divided us, because you can only imagine, as you know, coming from where my mother has had to work really hard, but I'm a product of, you know, let's just call it what it is, a rape, and my skin color is lighter. Now I get to do less. And if we can imagine, at that time, anything was better than being out in a field whipped and beaten to pick cotton. So the divide began between us. And because of that, and because of the ignorance of some of the teachings that we taught ourselves about how that makes someone better because of the complexion of their skin, and that's been carried from generation to generation ignorantly, it still affects us to this day, to the point that our relationships are sometimes, as women of color, stressed because of it. But you know what's really funny to me? My daughter, who is, Donna, you've never met my daughter, but my daughter is Dania's complexion. Her father is Dania's complexion. So my daughter did not even realize that we were different complexions until she was in school, and one of her friends ran to her and told her. She was like, "Kimora, that's your mom?" And she was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Oh," she said, "So you're dark skinned and your mom is light." And Kimora said that she looked at her skin, and then she looked at me, and that was the first time she'd ever even thought about it. Before that, I was just mom. So what that tells me is that if a child who's never even thought about that, but just sees me as her mother, never thought about the difference in our complexions, how much those things are systemically being carried on and carried through our culture that we hang on to when really kids don't even notice it. Kids don't even think about it. So those are just some of the things that I found. I found that, you know, in the workplace environments, we have the queen bee syndrome. There's always that one, you know, if we're talking about women of color still, there's always that one Black person, that Black female who wants to be the queen. So everyone else around her can never be on her level. And her job is to stay the queen. So her role isn't always to help see other women be successful.
Right.
And that has caused a problem in the workplace and in workplace relationships. And so those are just things that I've noticed just in conversations in season 1, where I'm having in-depth conversations with women about, you know, different content and subject matter.
So, you know, that's so interesting, because I think about white people who go to the beach and like try to get big darker, you know, and you know, it's just like my mother said, no one's ever happy with what they are.
Yeah.
Oh my.
So Sharrona, you're a native of Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
I
And
am.
you have obviously grown up in the South and have worked at a lot of jobs that are in the South and have been in the South. And obviously coaching for 18 years, you may have seen, you know, racial injustices around you as a coach, growing up and as a coach. And obviously now that you have your podcast and more of a platform, you've chosen to kind of really enlighten and kind of expose some of those situations that maybe you saw when you were growing up or coaching. My question to you is, tell us a little bit about growing up. What sort of situations did you find yourself really feeling, you know, some sort of racial injustice, whether it was growing up or coaching? Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I remember very vividly when I began to see that racism was real as a young girl. I don't remember it a lot in elementary school. I do remember the proverbial history classes where we talked about slavery. And I do remember feeling a little uncomfortable because at that time, not really having the knowledge of all that African Americans had accomplished throughout history as a young girl and not being given that information, you grow up thinking that you're just a slave. And, you know, if it wasn't for Dr. Martin Luther King or Harriet Tubman or Booker T. Washington or Frederick Douglass, that's kind of like our routine of the Black people that we're taught in elementary school. Outside of that, I didn't personally feel a lot of racism. But when I got to middle school, I will say that first of all, I'm from Tennessee. Growing up in Tennessee, women's basketball is just a big deal. It always has. I mean, a lot of that has to do with Pat Summitt and just her presence in the state of Tennessee and just how we feel about basketball just in general in the state of Tennessee and women's basketball. So my middle school was like a dynasty. Like you had to really try out to make a middle school basketball team. Like this was like the biggest deal. So this, you know, my middle school, we won championships. We were like a big deal. So when I realized that I was going to play basketball, because I really wanted to be a part of this little dynasty that I grew up watching in elementary school, excuse me, I made the team and I worked really, 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 really hard. And I was a very good middle school basketball player. And when I began to notice that racism was real was when, which is funny because sports is usually what unites us. Yes, but at a young age, growing up in the South, I would go to these elementary schools and I would, you know, and I'm just going to say it like it was, like I would just be beasting. I would beast these young kids just because I was just so passionate about basketball that I could see the visceral hatred from these Caucasian kids' parents and the things that they would yell and say to me in the stands as a child, to the point that it was almost like my mom and dad had to be my security. Like my family was security to get out of those gyms. Like I'm talking about elementary school gyms where it's standing room only, middle school gyms where it's standing room only. And, you know, the officials would call calls on me that if I barely touched a kid, it was a foul. But I could just get flagrant fouls and kids just, you know, landing on my head, you know, I'm falling to the ground and I'd never get a call. And so I begin to realize that, you know, this is like this is about my race. This isn't about basketball. This is about something
Right.
else, you know, and my parents had to talk to me about it. And it was just really hard. It was really hard at that time because I was just doing something that I loved and trying to be the best at it, but was being met with like all of these different emotions from people that
I have a question for you. Were you on a team of what was the demographics of your team? And did you have a white coach? Were there other white parents? I'm just curious.
Yes. Now, let me just tell you about my white coach. My white coach was my savior because in my middle school, he saw no color. Like really, when he's obviously saw our color, but none of us were treated differently. He treated all of us equally the same. As a matter of fact, he died like 3 years ago, and his family asked me to speak at his funeral.
Oh.
I was always his favorite, you know, through all those years. I was just always his favorite. And one of the things I remember saying at his homegoing service was how growing up in the 70s as a young girl and having him as a coach, you know, there was no separation between the Black kids and the white kids. We were all going to get fussed at. We were all going to run. We were all going to be demanded to give our best. And we all appreciated that. And as I was saying that, this room was full of Black people, white people, all people that had been coached by this man. And everybody's heads was like, yes, we love that about him because he treated us all the same. So it was really confusing to me as a young girl to have my coach who is loving all of us equally and treating all of us the same and pushing us and helping all of us be better. But then going into gyms where they'd be like predominantly white schools and being met with just such flagrancy and just such visceral at times. And, you know, to the point that I could visibly see it affecting my parents. And I remember like a moment where my mother and this other lady got into a really big argument where it was just like a crowd of people in the hallway. And I just remember being really scared. And, you know, that was when I knew that like, okay, these people don't like me because I'm Black and I'm good. It's not just because I'm good.
Right.
That's right. That's right. And how did your coach, I'm sorry, do you mind me asking you these questions?
No,
I'm fascinated. So how did your coach react to all these crazy calls being called on you?
Oh, he would he'd get kicked out of games. He was a wild animal anyway, you know, just passionate about the game. So, you know, there was times he'd get kicked out of games, he'd get technical fouls. And, you know, oddly though, we never spoke about it. We never talked about it. His fight for me was in the moment when I would, you know,
right. Perfect. That's where it should be.
Yeah, falling and, you know, fouling me, and the refs would look away like they didn't see anything. You know, he'd be over there yelling and screaming. So even in that moment, he was still my savior because it helped me to keep my emotions under control as a young girl because he stood up for me in such a way that, you know,
that
meant a lot.
Wow. Well, this was a very powerful experience. How many years did this go on for?
Oh gosh, all the way till I graduated high school.
Woo!
Yeah, all the way till I graduated.
And did it get progressively worse the older you got?
No, I feel like once I was in high school, it got a little more covert. Like the officials would still, you know, if I barely touched kids, you know, it was just going to be a big deal, you know, but I could be fouled a lot maybe before I ever got a call. At this point in high school, I was prepared for it. It wasn't new to me anymore. So it actually made me a better defender because I already knew what I was up against most nights. But it was a little more covert in high school, not as overt as it was in middle school, but it still happened.
Now, what about college? Because you played it at Alabama. So what was that experience like playing in Alabama?
My experience at Alabama was great. It was amazing. It really, I mean, I had an amazing experience at Alabama. I don't recall experiencing any racism at all at that time.
Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah. Alabama was a great experience. I played for a really great guy in Rick Moody. He was a good Christian man. He loved all of us. We had a coach who had recruited most of us at that time. She was a Black lady. Her name was Dottie Kelso. She died our senior year. Well, my senior year. at 31 years old of a brain aneurysm. She had just
Oh,
been engaged,
wow.
married, and we had all this talent on the team, and we had already that year started talking about, hey, we're going to go to the Final Four this year. It was like this dream way out there that we dreamed that we never thought would come true, but it actually happened, because we worked really hard as a team. And so I had a great time in Alabama. I didn't experience any racism. I didn't experience anything that made me uncomfortable as far as being a woman of color.
What position did you play?
All over, really.
Okay.
Because I played all over, really, because in high school I was a post player at 5'9.5". I'm only 5'9.5". People think I'm like 5'11" or 6 feet, but I'm not. I'm 5'9.5", and so I played a post player, which is probably the reason why I didn't end up at Tennessee, which was my dream school. I would have loved to have played for Pat, but I was a 5'9" post player, and back then Pat had 6'2" post players before everybody had 6'2" post players.
That's right.
Okay. So I ended up going to Alabama, and I played like what's considered a swing player. Like,
okay,
I had good enough skills to take people off the dribble at my size. I could shoot the three, but I had been a post for so long that I could take you down in the block and post a smaller guard up too. So just had a little bit of flexibility to my game.
Okay.
Now Donna knows exactly what you're talking about because she's an avid Celtic fan, season ticket holder, loves basketball probably more than I do. So she knows everything you're talking about. She's got a very, very high basketball IQ.
I can tell. She understood.
She's following you. But let's fast forward to motherhood. Kendon is 21 and Kim is 19. Both attend college. How has your experience growing up in the South, and obviously just everything you've witnessed, how has that shaped your approach to motherhood, raising your children in the South, and especially just raising your children with today's racial injustice and police brutality and so much that's going on in America?
Well, for me, I have always been a communicator. I communicate with my kids about everything. I talk to them about everything. So when they were young and they started entering the world of sports, remembering what I just shared with you guys about what I experienced, yes, I had to have conversations with them because my kids were big kids, like they're big kids. So they were bigger than all of the kids that they were playing against. And so what I created for them, and I tell people this and they laugh, and I really do believe, honestly, this came from God, because this just didn't pop up in my head on how to tell my kids this, but I told my kids to everybody that you meet, guys, is on the light system. I said, let me tell you what I mean by the light system. And this was something that their little young minds could comprehend. Mm-hmm. I said, everybody starts, I said, you know how like when I'm driving and I stop at a light, and they said, yeah. I said, okay, everybody starts on red. Everybody. I don't care what color they are. Everybody starts on red. And as you get to know them and you get to know their character and how they are as a person and how they treat you and the things that they say and the things that they do, if you find that those things are good, then you can move them to yellow. Now, yellow means that they're now, you like them. You may talk to them. You may spend time with their presence. You'll get to know them better, and you'll continue to spend time in their presence and get to know them better. And after you've spent enough time with them to know that they're good people, that your dad and I would be happy for you guys to be around and to be friends with, regardless of their color, then you move them to green. And when you move them to green, those are your friends. You look out for them, you guys take care of each other, and you move forward with them. I said, but everyone has to start on red, because people have to prove to you who they are and if they're worthy to be your friend. And they've carried that with them before they went to college.
That's excellent.
I remember the light system, right?
Yeah. No, that's good. I like that.
Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, I think you could trademark that.
Yeah. I'm sure our moms out there are taking notes of that little nugget right there, the light system. Yeah. Very important to teach them how to.
So I'm thinking about, so your son is what? Is it 21?
He's 21.
21.
Right. Mm-hmm. And your daughter is 19. Okay. Okay, so I'll tell you about something that happened to me this week and see if you can relate to this at all. Because
Okay.
Daniel calls me the little vigilante because I'm a peanut. I'm only about 5'1", by the way.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, yeah, and my dear friend Dania, you know how tall she
I
is. So
do.
we I love our differences.
Yeah.
So I was driving in a nearby community, and I was close to my job, and I saw a state police officer with a young man of color sitting on sitting on the side of the road, and his trunk was open, his car doors were open. So I drove by once and I said, huh, okay. So of course I circled back and I pulled up in front, not to interfere, but just to observe. Because, and then he was having, and this is at 11 o'clock in the morning, and this young man, he was going through a field sobriety test. And I said, seriously? So obviously he passed it. He continues to sit there, and he's thoroughly searched his car by this point. And now the state police officer is watching me. He storms up to me, leaving his person he's pulled over, and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm watching. He said, why? He said, and then he went on to try to intimidate me. And then he asked me for my license and registration because I was watching what he was doing with this young man. And so, and went on. He ends up giving me a ticket, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, $55. And I'm going to contest it. I'm going to go to court. I don't care.
What was the ticket for?
Oh, well, my fault. He said, you're going to be sorry you did this today. He was telling me these things, and I'm looking at him, and he ran my registration and license and everything. Of course, I came back fine. But obviously, this young man, he obviously ran his plate, and there was nothing wrong. He didn't find him to be intoxicated or anything, and he didn't find any drugs or illegal things in his car. So I'm saying, and I said, so is this young man in trouble? And he said, I'm trying to confirm his name. And I just said, wow, that's why he was being pulled over and like this incredible search done on him. And so I guess what I'm thinking is that I think it's all for me. It's time for like everyone to like say, we're watching you. We're watching your behavior. So I wasn't trying to interfere, but I was going to watch. And even after he proceeds to give me the ticket, I didn't move.
Now I've got the ticket. Listen, I bought this space now.
Kidding, right? But I just think that I wasn't trying to interfere, and I couldn't even hear what they were saying, but I was just trying to give the message that, I wanted to let this young man know that someone was watching.
Yes. And I'm positive that in that moment, you were a comfort to him. And he probably had no idea who you were or what your race was, Donna. He just was happy that somebody had stopped to acknowledge what was happening to him in the event that things turned left. And this is a great conversation to have just in general, because my ex-husband is police. So I was married to a police officer for 15 years. So I worry about this with my son all of the time. And my son is 6'8". He's a 6'8" kid with dreads. So and he's not a slim 6'8". He's a big 6'8", a broad 6'8". So when you see him, you don't see a 21-year-old young man. You see someone who is a big figure that looks menacing to some people, depending on how you see him.
God forbid he put a hoodie on, right?
Amen.
Sorry.
He looks like a young African-American male to us culturally. But those who are not in our culture, they see him as a menace or possibly someone who could be attempting to do something wrong. And he has been stopped by the police before. And his dad has, expressed to him how to handle it. Surprisingly, the times that he's been stopped, he's never told law enforcement that his dad is police. And I always say, that's the first thing you should say. But once you have a conversation with my son and you hear him talk, instantly this kid is not a threat. This kid is not a threat.
You know what? But see, here's the problem. Okay, so he might not be a threat, and I'll talk to him and feel that way. But sometimes I think, now this man was so angry with me. You have no idea. He was seething, and he kept saying, "What are you doing here? Why are you watching? What are you doing?" He said, you're going to be sorry you stopped and interfered. And I said, I'm not interfering. I'm just watching.
And that's right.
And I wasn't interfering, but I just wanted to make sure that nothing nefarious went on, that because I had no idea, like, why are you still holding him?
Well, what's interesting is his response to you, because everything is on the up and up, and you're only just trying to identify this young man's name. There's no reason to be this angry. There's no reason to be upset with me, because I stopped just to make sure. You could have been concerned about the officer's safety. Who knows? Like, you just stopped to look. It didn't necessarily mean that you were there to protect the gentleman, the young Black boy. So the officer, his response just in general was, as you said, nefarious, because it's like, okay, why are you this upset if you're just doing your job?
Right. Because if you're confident and comfortable with your actions, you don't mind people watching you. Doing anything. And I was so far away, and I said, so this kid is such a danger that, he had to walk at least. I was so far away. It was crazy because I was watching in my rearview mirror. Yeah. And so I just found it interesting. And you know what? I'm going to keep doing it. I don't care. Bring it on.
Good. It's funny, Donna, because I don't know if you remember this story, but you and I really got together to kind of create this platform for a discussion about race the weekend of George Floyd's murder. And that same weekend, Martin was on his way back from New York and got pulled over by the police. And it was the first time that had ever happened. But usually when they're driving, I'm usually tailing them on my little spy app that I have where I could watch what road they're on. And I noticed he stopped. And as soon as I noticed that, he called me, said, "Hey, Mom, I just got stopped by the police." I said, "Where are you?" And I'm thinking he's coming from New York. And at the time I lived in Rhode Island. So he could have been in Connecticut. He could have been anywhere in between. But he happened to be like a mile down the road from the house. Okay. So I I kept him on the phone. I got in my car right away. I pulled alongside because they were saying, oh my God, you don't even know. I don't even know. I can't even tell you how much time it took for me to get there because my mind was just lost, right? Yeah. So they're facing this way. So I pull up facing the other way, and I pull up right in front of the officer's car and say, "Hey, officer, would you mind me just pulling up in front of my son's car?" I said, I'm his mom. I just want to just sit with him, while you, do what you need to do. He goes, "Oh, no, that's fine. Sure. Go ahead. Well, be careful. Make a U-turn. Pull up in front." And, so I'm sitting there. My son's still on speakerphone. I hear the police officer, after he does his investigation, comes to my son's window, and he's talking to him nice. "Hey, you're really 6'8"? Wow, you must be a tall boy. You play basketball? Oh, where do you play?" Like, he's having a real conversation with my son. And my son was speeding, and he had every right to be pulled over. But where is that, interaction that could de-escalate so many situations? Where is a police officer's kind of, even in his encounter with Donna, why do you have to be so angry? Why do you have to be so protective? Why do you have to be so defensive? Have a conversation, find out who people are. What this kid could be, going through something. There's so many things I think police officers could be so great at along with their job, because they're sometimes the first line of help.
Yes, and there's a level of respect that we naturally give you as police.
Yes.
I mean, you'll get a rogue person every once in a while that's just, that's probably run into the law before and has had bad, experiences with the law. So they may not be as respectful, but for the most part, there's a level of respect that we all give to police, to the point that how you speak to us can de-escalate a situation immediately. Immediately.
Because we know their jobs are very dangerous. We don't simplify that at all. You're getting up every single day, leaving your family, and you don't know whether you're going to come back at night at the end of your shift. So we also get that. We get the level of danger that they face. So you're right.
They could just say a word and it can calm the whole situation down. But it just seems like in this climate today, it's this aggressiveness that you show up with on the spot that you haven't even assessed the situation. If we look at Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back, 7 times, he's the guy that's there trying to keep peace and break up the fight. and get shot 7 times because, those police officers show up aggressively, not assessing the situation or the scene. And now this guy is going to be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. Coming into the scene and just having a spirit to just check, obviously be safe, but to find out what's going on before it escalates to gunshots.
Right. But I feel it's really important. And I know, people might think I'm cuckoo for what I did, pulling over, but I'm going to keep doing it. And I think it's time now that we become very transparent in our interactions, and for mothers to say, you know what, I'm hoping someone, if that's someone's son.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's someone's son over there on the side of the road, all by himself with that nasty police officer. And I'm sorry, many police officers are wonderful, but that was a nasty guy, and I know that because he was nasty with me. He didn't say good morning, ma'am. He said, "What are you doing?" That's not how you walk up to someone.
Right.
What are you doing? What are you doing? And I'm a very nice person, but I'm not easily intimidated. And I said, "You're making me nervous. Why are you doing that?" He said, "Well, why are you here?" And he hated that. And you know what? All it did was empower me to say, well, I guess I'm going to be doing this more often.
Yeah. I don't think you're crazy at all because I've done it. I saw a group of African-American girls be pulled over, and there were like 3 police cars, and the girls were in handcuffs. Instantly, they looked like they were high school kids. To see them in handcuffs as a mother, I was instantly like, pulled over on the side of the road, and I just sat in my car and I looked it through my rearview mirror.
Okay.
I was watching, just as you. I was watching to see what was going to happen with these girls. They looked terrified. The police was pulling stuff out of their car. The trunk was lifted. They had hands behind their backs with, handcuffs on. And as a mom, I just could not drive by that and not just stop and make sure the girls were going to be okay. I couldn't do it. There was nothing in me. Even if I knew that it was going to bring drama to me in that moment, I had to do it. And I stopped and I watched and I watched and I watched, and I saw another police officer point up to my car, and I saw him ask the other officer, like, "Who is that?" And I saw the officer shake his head, and he was like, "I don't know, like, maybe one of their moms or something." But they never approached me. They never, came and said anything to me. And when I saw them take the handcuffs off the girls and let down the trunk, and I saw the girls getting in their car, I drove off.
Right.
Because I knew they were going to be okay, but just in general, I'm like, they're girls. Like, what do you think they're going to do? Like, these kids couldn't have been any more than probably 16, 17, 18-year-old young ladies.
Right. Well, this young man, obviously, they had run his plate, and there was nothing wrong with the vehicle he was in. I mean, so I'm saying, okay, what else could there be here? You know? He's sober. There's nothing in his car. His car is good. Let the kid go move on.
But you know what's hard for me, Donna and Dania? The intent behind those actions to our young Black males, the intention of what you're trying to do to them, those type of police officers. The intention is to cause fear in these young men. The intention is to, emasculate them as men. And and to make them feel inferior in the moment. And that is at the root of it, to fear the police, to, be worried about the police. And I know we've all probably seen that little clip where it was this young kid outside playing basketball, and the police drove by, and he stopped playing basketball and hid behind a car. So the police, he was a young boy, probably couldn't have been any more than 8 or 9 years old. He hid behind the car. He's just shooting ball in his own driveway. But he saw the police go by, and he hid behind a car until the police drove by, and then he started shooting ball again. Like,
well, that, you know what? And it's complete, and isn't that crazy? So I guess what I'm saying is that it's time for women, all women, to I think that we need to just stand up and say, we're not going to do this behavior anymore. We're not going to allow this behavior anymore. And so I'm just not afraid. I'm just going to keep doing it. And
I love the fact that you're not afraid, Donna. And to be honest, for us as African-American women, it's going to take more Caucasian women like you to help create the change that we need to see. Because we can't, and this isn't something that Black people have done to themselves. It's things that are being done to us. And only people like you who are unafraid, that will stand up and stand in the gap and stand beside us, is going to really what's going to cause change. And I will tell you that when George Floyd was killed and Ahmaud Arbery, I live probably about 35 minutes from Brunswick, Georgia, where Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down by those two men, but the third one who participated. And I went out and I protested and I marched, and I will tell you that there was what just did my heart great was to see so many white people out protesting that were pissed off. Like they were pissed off. And I said, and if we can keep this type of energy and this type of pissed off, we can make a change in this country, because it's not just going to be at the hands of any one group of people for America to move past this and really, die to this racist systemic spirit in this country.
It's time for us. See, I grew up in a very different kind of environment where diversity was celebrated. And it's very unusual. I know I grew up in a very unusual household where I had a mother who had a lot of different kinds of friends. She went to school with lots of different people. And I told Dania this. My sister was the only white person in her classroom. So no one grows up like I did, I mean, or not, well, very few. But wasn't I lucky?
Yes.
So where diversity was celebrated or accepted, and it was just part of our fabric. It was never even discussed. We didn't even talk about it. But
that doesn't happen. That doesn't, I mean, you're one of the few, Donna. You're one of the few that have had the opportunity to experience diversity and appreciate diversity and share diversity with your children, and that generational acknowledgement and respect just keeps a positivity when it comes to others. And a lot of people did not grow up with that exposure. And that's what, to Sharrona's point, Black Lives Matter was just protests before we had allies, before we had white people get involved. And now it's a movement. Now it's a statement. Now it's a need for change. Prior to that, it was just Blacks that were tired, that wanted to protest and make a statement, but we weren't being heard. But you're being heard. And people like you are being heard, and kids of all ages are now being heard, because it doesn't only affect Black people.
Right.
Now it's really pissing off a whole lot of people.
Well, yes. And I love seeing the protests and seeing all the diversity and all of the, and the young people. There's so many angry young people, and I love that. Not that I want people to, people need to be angry about this. This is something to be angry about. But beyond being angry, it's about action and just saying, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to tolerate anymore. And every week we have different guests, and I learn more and more. And I cover I think I'm such a hip white woman, and you know what? I know nothing. I keep learning more and more. But Dania, don't we every week we talking to people? Oh my gosh, we learn so much.
Something that I would love for people to consider from something that you just said, Donna. You talked about how you grew up in a very diverse background, like you were around a lot of people, and that your sister was really the only white person in her class at times. And I want us to see that on a deeper level, because what that said is that if those people were Black people, I'm assuming they were Black people, your sister, they were welcoming to your sister.
Oh yeah.
Her being the only white person didn't make them exclude her.
Right.
So many times when the shoe is on the other foot, and there's just that one Black person in the room, we don't always feel that welcoming. We don't always feel that what your sister was able to feel. And I think that it's really important that in both situations, when it's the only white person, that person should feel 100% welcome. When it's the only Black person, that person should feel 100% welcome. And I think that culturally, because we have been oppressed for so long, and because we do know what it's like to feel unimportant, it's easy for us to embrace. It's easy for us to let everybody in and just be welcoming, because we know what it's like to feel left out.
That's right. That's right.
And even one year, her teacher was a woman of color too. So everyone in her whole world And and we even talked about it just a couple of weeks ago again. And she said, yeah, it was fine. You know, she has nothing to say about it except that she was very comfortable. And she didn't think about it. I mean, she knew. I mean, and you know, when people say this, I always love this. I don't see color. I said, oh, baloney. Of course you see color. I said, but you know, see it and love it, you know, versus I don't see it. I don't believe that.
And I think another thing we've learned in our conversation, and even this one in particular, is that not only do we have to be mothers and protect our own children, but we have to protect all the children.
That's right.
All the children that are
that
facing.
young man.
Yes. We have to. We have a right. We have a duty to stand up as mothers and say we're not going to allow this to happen to any of our children, because you know, we talked about Jacob Blake's mother and how passionate she was about just ending the systemic racism, ending this police brutality, and it's so heartfelt for a mother to lose a child, but to lose a child to something that has plagued our people for so long. Like enough's enough. And we do need allies. We do need people to stop on the side of the road and check on our children and make sure they get home safely. They come back to us safely. We can't be everywhere, but we do need to have that support of one another from a mother's perspective and say, not another child will be lost to this injustice.
Yes.
We need to stand up to it.
And Donna's. We do.
Well, I guess I have to, and I didn't know whether I was going to even say anything. I told Dania about my little, she calls me the little vigilante. And, but
I said, did you get arrested?
She said, because I'm texting her while it's happening. And she says, don't get arrested.
But you know what? The officer knew that he couldn't do anything to you, Donna, for just stopping. You had the right. He could give you a ticket, but I mean, you can go and fight that ticket. Like, and most judges are probably going to throw it out, and it's probably not going to be a big deal. But for me, as a woman with a son,
right,
what you did is if we all just covered each other as women, because you know what, I am so exhausted as a mom, and I know that I'm not the only woman of color who feels this way. I'm so exhausted worrying about my son. I'm so exhausted with him being away from home and wondering if the police pull him over, if he's out with his friends, I almost feel like Black kids cannot always get the freedom to just be kids, because one little mistake that you might make as a teenager, which is a teenager mistake, like who didn't make teenage mistakes or young adult mistakes that could cost him his life in a moment. He just doesn't have the freedom to just be like a 21-year-old white kid in college. My son doesn't have that. And so you stopping and, checking on that young man to make sure he's okay, to some Black mother out there, that's one moment that we didn't have to worry that anything was going to happen to our kid.
Right. Well,
amen.
This is what I think this is what we have to do. And what did it cost me? Cost me nothing. I mean, nothing, except, and I kept looking at that kid and I wasn't going to leave him,
Well, this has been a great conversation, and it's going on an hour. So we definitely have to cut it short, but I think the three of us could spend hours talking about this. And, Sharrona, best of luck to these three things. I think you have a great platform to share some significant information to women of color, to just people who are eager to make a change and to kind of unite us all as people, and I think you're doing an excellent job. Please tell the audience about your platform so they can listen to your podcast and follow you.
Okay, well, if you want to just know more about the podcast and just how it was started, a little bit more about me and my background, or how to contact me, you can do that on these3-things.com. That's my website. It lists all of the guests that are on the podcast. With each episode, it tells about the guest. And if you're interested in reaching out to any of my guests, all of their social medias are there as well. So you can contact, connect, ask questions.
Cool.
Dr. Patricia, the therapist on the show, is there as well. So if you want to reach out to Dr. Patricia for any, counseling, she's there too. I am on Apple. I'm on Spotify. I'm on any platform that you can find and be able to listen to the podcast. And it's these three things podcast. And it's a Black girl with a big afro sitting in a chair.
Fabulous.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your time, your thoughts, your passions with us. And, let's unite as mothers and take care of our children.
Yes.
All of them. All right. Thank you so much for joining
Bye-bye.
us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.